Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Jennifer Sherman. How are you today, Jennifer?
I'm good, Desiree. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. I am so honored to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I can't wait for the listeners to learn more. Just to share a little bit about you, Jennifer, so the listeners can get a sense of who you are and just an iceberg tip of what you know. You're the founder of Envision Leadership Consulting, and you have really coached and trained thousands of leaders worldwide. You're a certified executive coach, instructional designer, and facilitator. And so I can't wait to learn more about this and how you're helping people. So, Jennifer, would you share with us how this journey happened for you? What led you to founding and launching Envision Leadership Consulting?
Sure. Yeah. So it wasn't a straight line. I'll say that. I actually had a previous career in marketing and advertising. So I came from the corporate world and I had some wonderful jobs. I worked for companies like MasterCard and USA Network, and I loved what I did, but there was just something gnawing at me that this wasn't my soul's work. And so it took a few years of just asking the question, like, what do I want to do? What am I meant to do? And, life has a way of kind of corralling you when you're not ready to leave your comfort zone. And so I decided, coaching, this was 20 years ago, was still a really new concept. And it had come up a couple times. So I decided that I was just going to put myself into coaching school. And worst came to worst, I would leave with an excellent leadership tool to help me in my corporate career. But if I loved it, that maybe I would leave and start my own company. And that's what happened. I went to school, and the first day I was there, it was just like, this is what I've been searching for. And so I got my certification. The company that I was with was going through a merger, and I wasn't interested in doing that. And I quit. And I said, I'm going to give myself a year and see if I can make this happen. And that was 20 years ago. So it all worked out.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I love that. It's like this conversation I have with so many of my guests. Their path has never been straight. It's always these twists and turns and things that happen in our life that kind of point us in a new direction. So it's a reminder that that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to just be point A to point B. That's the straight line. So I love that it's so normal. I'm
Yeah.
going to use that quote unquote normal, really more so than the straight line.
Yeah, that you don't have to have it all figured out. And it's never too late to make a career change either. I think, people stay in places or situations they don't enjoy because they think maybe like the window's passed. But it's really never too late to make a change if you're willing to work at it and you want it bad enough. I think there's always opportunity. And also sometimes hard things happen to move you along when you don't want to move. So for me, he's now my ex-husband, but my fiance at the time he was in the Marine Corps Reserves and was called up on a Thursday and said, you're deploying to Afghanistan for a year on Monday. And so it was when he was away that I put myself into coaching school as a way to, keep my mind on other things and do something positive for myself. So sometimes discomfort is also kind of the best door to great things.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I think that is so often the catalyst, right? When we are feeling that pain, that discomfort, or challenging times happen. And I think a lot of us recognize that from the, COVID, the pandemic, super challenging time, but it opened up, I think, a door for a lot of people to really look at how things can be different and, do things differently. And so it was difficult and traumatic in a lot of ways, but it opened up so much for so many people.
Agreed. Yeah, and it's changed how we work, like how the whole workforce operates, right? And we've learned that we can do things in different ways and still be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's dive into our topic today. I first want to start out with what we're hearing so much recently, and that's mindset. And how does this idea of our mindset impact our success, either success or failure, really?
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, I love this topic. It's one of my favorite topics. And I'll say that so I've been coaching executives for 20 years, and I always like to share this because I think people having negative self-talk think that they're alone with that not everybody has that. And I have never worked with an executive at any level all the way up through the C-suite where we did not have to do some foundational work on mindset, because everybody has self-doubt. Everybody has moments where they're not, they're comparing themselves, or they think they're not good enough, or things like that. So mindset impacts everything that we do, right? What we tell ourselves really can either help us or block us, depending on the messaging, from what we're trying to do, either for ourselves, in our personal lives, or in our careers. Like, if you think about why people stay in situations that aren't good for them, right? A lot of that has to do with the narrative they've created. And what I try to share with people is that your narrative isn't the truth. It's just the stories that you've built from your life experiences. And so it's our job to challenge the narratives that are not helping us, and replace those narratives with thoughts that can really support the types of things that we're trying to make happen in our lives.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I completely agree with you. And the idea of these stories that we tell ourselves continuously, right? So frequently that we don't even realize we're telling ourselves these stories anymore. And they do keep us stuck in these jobs, relationships, whatever, far past the time that we need to move on. And so, how can we begin to change those stories that we're telling ourselves, that narrative that keeps running in the background that we're not even really conscious of?
Yeah. It's such a great question. And the good news is I've been teaching mindset for 20 years. It's a skill. It's a learnable skill. And so one of the things that I share oftentimes, because I think you make such a great point, that it's often kind of running, I call it like it's like our operating system. It's like running in the background and we don't even know it's there. And one of the ways for me that I'm curious what your experience is, that I notice that maybe what I'm saying to myself is not helpful is I will be anxious, or my adrenaline's up, or I'm carrying like tension in my body. And usually that's an indicator to me that there is some kind of messaging going on in my head, either about myself, another person, or a situation that I'm in, that probably isn't the most productive way of thinking. I don't know if you've had similar like physical experiences.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's times when, everybody feels it in their body differently, right? But so I notice a lot, it's that gut kind of either it's excitement or it's fear or something is going on where that reaction is happening for me at that gut kind of level, or in the stomach where you feel like it's butterflies. But it could be thought of either way though, right? It could be that it's exciting and
Yeah.
a little scary, or it could be I'm anxious and I'm really scared about whatever this fork in the road I've come to or decision I need to make.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that for sure happens. And, I've had guests on who've talked about different ways that we can work that through our body. And so what are your thoughts? I know a lot of it is like changing our positioning, just, dropping our shoulders, rolling our shoulders back makes a huge difference. What do you think?
Yeah, well, so I wanna, make sure I answer your first question, which is how
Sure.
do we change the narrative? Because I don't think I answered it, but I so when you notice those physical cues, you can start to tap into what your narrative actually is, and when you can identify it, then you have the power to change it. And I think it's 1, not accepting it as truth, and then 2, just working on coming up with a different narrative that it doesn't even have to be positive. It just at least has to be neutral. It has to be something that can like level you out or support you in what you're trying to do. And, for people who read books on micro habits and books like Atomic Habits, you are basically retraining your brain to build new neural pathways because our self-talk is automatic. Those are like microseconds of just it's a reaction. And so you can actually retrain your brain to have new, different automatic thoughts, but it does require consistency. So if you find that you've got a pervasive thought that you think is holding you back, maybe I know a lot of people are out of work right now, and there's a lot of nervousness around finding another job and am I qualified and all of those things. So you really have to work on some of those narratives and just remind yourself each and every day before you get up to job search, like, I have a lot of value. There's a place for me. I'm going to bring a tremendous amount of value to some organization when I find the right opportunity. So it's just a conscious replacement of thoughts. And then on the physical side, I haven't done or studied a lot in relaxation, but I will say, are you familiar with power poses, Desiree? Have you heard of the
Yes.
power poses? We've all heard of the power poses. I haven't used them too much, but I did use them one time for a very difficult phone call that I had to have with someone. And they really helped me just feel more confident. So they work, the victory pose and the Wonder Woman pose. And so I think you have to find what works for you, but just know that you're not trapped with those thoughts, that you actually can do something about them.
Yes, absolutely. 100% agree with you on that. So much of what you shared, I think that the listeners can really begin to apply that right now. It's not something that you have to, it's like that. You talked about the micro habits. These are little steps that you can take every day when you notice those thoughts that pop up. I recently just read this idea of Joe Dispenza's work. If you're familiar with what he does, you talked about neuroplasticity, and there's a lot of what he talks about is related to that. This idea of this thought that comes up, and you just say change, just the word change, and then you can lead in with that next thought. And like you shared, I'm going to bring tremendous value. I have so many skills and to offer, or whatever the case is
Yeah.
for the situation that you're in. So I think that's something we can all do right away. So I love that. And the power poses, yes, I love that as well. I think it really does make a difference. And this idea of when you're feeling that nervousness or scared or whatever, that anxiety, the shaking of your body to
Mhm.
release that. I
Yeah.
love the idea of that. And I've done that myself. It's like just switches something in your brain and allows those feelings to like move through your body to be released. And so I 100% agree with that, concept, those ideas and poses. So, can we talk now a little bit about this idea of how leadership requires emotional quotient, so EQ?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that, and how is that important, and how does that play out for people who are in leadership roles? And really, that's everybody, if you're a parent or, have siblings or whatever, not just a manager or leader in a company,
Yeah.
or an entrepreneur. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So there's a couple of skills that I teach that I call them the foundation of the house. Mindset's one of them, right? Because that sets your stability at the base. And I think as leaders and as humans, EQ is another one of those foundational skills because emotional intelligence is really all about a couple of key things that we're self aware, right? That we can understand and not just our preferred habits and behaviors, but also aware enough to know the impact that they're having on other people. But we're also in tune with our audience. And so leaders then understand that they lead teams of very diverse people whose brains operate in a completely different way oftentimes than theirs. They think differently, they communicate differently, they want to work on things to drive outcomes differently. And so it's so important that leaders understand that and can take that into account so they're not using this kind of one size fits all approach. And a lot of what I work with leaders on, besides leading their teams, is also managing up and leading through influence. And it's very hard to be influential if you do not have emotional intelligence, because it's almost like you're speaking a different language than the person you're trying to influence. And we know that just innately, we are sort of drawn to people that are like us because we feel like we speak the same language. And so the more adept we get at, I really always talk about emotional intelligence as being like multilingual in behavior, because I think it helps people go, okay, well, if I was traveling to another country and I speak, English, but let's say I'm going to Germany, I might speak poorly, but make an effort to speak German. And I'm probably going to get a better reception. People are going to be kinder and more helpful to me. And that's not me abandoning who I am, because I get that pushback sometimes when I teach EQ skills. It's really just me showing that I have respect for the language that someone else speaks, and I want to meet them where they are so we can have the best interaction. And that's kind of the basis of emotional intelligence. So it's a critical relationship skill. And I love that you mentioned families. And because when I teach it, I always say, we're talking about it in a work sense, but this will help you at home with your partner and your kids and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I can totally see how when you are making that effort, like you said, to reach someone where they're at, the response that you're going to get is going to be entirely different than if you're coming at them from whatever way that you speak, the way that you think. Their reaction is going to be completely different, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's such a great point, and something we can really all remember to slow down and really stop for a moment and think about it in like kind of a different way so that we can then approach that person or that topic and come to a resolution faster, or working arrangement or whatever the case is.
Yeah, just being attuned to who's in front of you. So let's say I'm someone who's very fast paced. I'm very results driven. I'm very candid, and I'm a very logical thinker. And I'm giving a directive to someone who the way to connect with them is through relationship. Like that's how they build trust and rapport. And they're more of a processor. So they like to ask questions and take time to think through what I've shared. Well, if I don't alter my messaging at all, it's not that they can't figure it out, but in terms of me building trust and respect with them, probably going to be more limited. And so as leaders, we need to make people feel supported and, at all levels, and make sure that they feel like we understand them and we're communicating in a way that resonates for them. So it's also a learnable skill, and it's something I'm still practicing every day, but it really does make a huge difference in the interactions you have.
Yeah, for sure. I can completely see that. Well, so Jennifer, let's talk now about trust, since you just touched on that. And how does trust get built? And you shared just briefly there about a little bit of how we can begin to build that trust. And why is this so important for leaders?
Especially right now where there's so many people getting laid off, we're in such an uncertain economy, and I think that trust is again foundational in getting people to actually want to follow you as a leader and respecting you and wanting to work hard, right? So trust is built in a multitude of ways. It's built through transparency, it's built through consistent communication. It's, believe it or not, it's built through things like giving constructive and positive feedback, because a lot of leaders don't use that or shy away from it. But your willingness to observe people and put energy into developing them. A lot of times when I am talking to, so I do career coaching as well. And when I'm talking to people who are unhappy in their role, it's typically because they don't feel seen. They don't feel supported. They don't feel that their leader has any care about their career growth, or that there's just a lack of transparency. So maybe that leader is lacking strategic thinking, and or has it, but isn't trickling that down to people. So the why are we doing things? The why does it matter? I talk a lot about context because I think it's a very underutilized skill, but or tool, I should say, that just giving context can make people feel really motivated and more engaged. But it does take a little bit of extra time and energy. But I think all of those things, plus I'm sure many I'm missing, but all of those build trust and creating psychological safety. I think that's a topic people are talking a lot about now. And that is creating an environment where people can feel safe to speak up or say things that might be different than how their boss thinks or how someone else thinks, so that you can get all the best ideas on the table. And so leaders either create or prohibit that space from existing based on how they lead and how they respond to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it came to mind for me this idea of sitting around a table in a conference room, and people want to share their ideas, but are often afraid to say anything. And that could be because there's not an environment that welcomes different ideas,
Yeah.
or, they've maybe tried to share something before and been shot down. And so I can see how, if a leader is taking the time to build some of that trust and, allowing that open communication for those new and different ideas, you can be so much more successful, really.
Yeah.
Ah,
And that ties back to emotional intelligence too, because you have people at the table who will dominate the room, and you have people at the table who are processing. And if you as a leader don't do enough to draw out the voices that are processing, again, you're kind of missing the value of part of your team.
yeah, completely. That is for certain. Because it's just, again, this idea of somebody who's sitting there wanting to share their idea, but are not. What if that idea is the solution to whatever problem you're facing, or whatever the next thing is that needs to be done to bring success, and
Yeah.
you're not even hearing it. Oh my gosh. So let's talk a little bit about what are some behaviors that women, because I think a lot of times it's women who are not feeling comfortable to speak up, that have been taught to lower their voices, or, not show up as confidently.
Yeah. So I will say I'm just in the last few years sort of realizing all the thoughts I've been indoctrinated into as a woman, just all the messaging we were raised with that, and I'm Gen X, that I didn't realize how it's played out in my career. Because even now, I think it's such a tough situation for women, because on the one hand, women get told, well, you're not confident enough. You need to work on your confidence. And that's why women aren't in the C-suite and in the boardrooms. But at the same time, you have really confident women who are showing up in that way, and they're still not in the C-suite and boardrooms. And I think that women are facing this system that is not created by them or for them, that you know I think makes it difficult to be confident, right? Because if we're assertive, then we're seen as aggressive. If we're, polite and ladylike and humble, then we're too soft and not powerful enough. And so it can be hard to figure out where to play. And I think we're at the point, I hope we're at the point where I think we just have to unapologetically take up space and show up authentically as who we are, and stop worrying about, what mold we're going to fit, because we don't either way we go, there's some way or shape to kind of find fault with us. So I think you have to really, and goes back to self-talk, know your worth, know your value, and you should take time periodically to kind of reaffirm for yourself the unique value that you bring, so that you know that about yourself, and so that you advocate for yourself. So I think that's really important. I don't know if that answered your question, Desiree, but
Yeah, no, I think you definitely touched on the concept of, like, why we historically have not felt comfortable, speaking up. And it's really goes back to, if you do speak up, then you're thought to be aggressive or too loud, or, you're too manly, or whatever, they're gonna say. And I love that you said, basically, you just need to remind yourself of the value that you have. And one of my previous guests had shared, like, save in your emails all of the successes, any kind of feedback you've gotten from your bosses that have said you've done a great job, whatever. So you can go back through that and remind yourself of, yeah, I do have value. I have great ideas. I am worthy of being in this space and holding this position. Or even in your notepad, write all the things that you've accomplished, just something that you can look
yeah.
back on and remind yourself, so that then you can feel good about stepping up and sharing again. And I'm Gen X as well. And so I can totally relate to that, you know, you're too quiet or you speak up too loud and whatever. And so now, yeah, I think we're at a point where we just need to say, too bad.
And I think also if you are someone who sits at the table and holds your thoughts to yourself because you're worried that it's not the right thought or you didn't research it enough, I often have this conversation with clients and I say to them, how many times what percentage of the time when you held the thought back, did either someone else say it 5 minutes later and everyone loved the thought, or you wanted to make sure you were correct, so you held off on it, but you went back and vetted your data and it was accurate. And so I think if you are someone who's quieter or holds yourself back from speaking up, it's just a reminder to challenge yourself, like find sort of lower risk places to practice, but just to start making sure you're getting your voice out because that increases your visibility, which is so critical in growing in our careers, making sure we're not hiding in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're not speaking up, nobody's going to know you're there.
Yep. And it's even worse in the virtual world because
Right.
you're really not visible if you're not engaging in the conversation. So if you're working remotely or hybrid, even more important to make sure not that you're speaking for the sake of speaking, but that you are bringing your ideas to the table. I always say, if you were invited to the meeting, you're there for a reason. You're there for your expertise, you're there for your value. Bring it.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so Jennifer, would you share with us how we as women can begin to position ourselves for leadership roles, for growth? And I think you touched a little bit on that and making sure that your voice gets heard. But what else do you want to share on this idea?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that, again, I learned later in my career that I wish people had told me earlier. So I think that when I worked in the corporate world, I didn't really think about networking or building my network. And I think no matter what, where you work, you should focus on building your network in your organization, in different silos in your organization. You should have relationships so that you also understand the breadth of your business, because part of moving ahead is that you are someone who is starting to evolve strategically. So you're moving from individual contributor to manager to then maybe leader of an area to, maybe leader of a couple of different areas. And so the more that you understand not just your business, but also getting out into the industry, like attending conferences every now and again to hear what's going on in your industry, that's going to expand your thinking and it's going to enhance your value because you're going to bring ideas that are bigger than just, it's hard because we're so busy. We're just kind of head down in the work. But having that network and leveraging that network is so important. And then finding ways to be visible, whether it's speaking up at meetings, whether it's asking for opportunities when it's appropriate to be in certain meetings. I know earlier in my career, I would write these huge strategic plans and my boss would present them and I wouldn't be invited to the meeting. And so I learned to advocate for myself. And I think advocating for yourself in a professional way is so important. If there are opportunities to get more visibility with senior leadership, depending on your level, that you're asking for those things. So I think there's lots of different ways that we can propel ourselves, but we can't do it if we aren't willing to speak our value. And I think it's building comfort with that and quieting down the noise in our head that says that everybody's better than us. One little stat I heard from a wonderful speaker years ago that I'm curious if you've heard it, but this is for any of the job seekers out there. But they talked about the difference between men and women and what percentage of the next level job. So you've nodding, you've heard this. And
That's
I
good.
think it bears reminding. So for those of you who haven't heard it, basically what the stats are is that men will look at the next level job and if they can do about 50% of it, they'll feel qualified to do it. Whereas women will look at the next level job and feel that they need to be able to do 90% of it to be qualified for it. And if you take that into real world terms, that means that women are not applying for jobs that they are more qualified for than the men who are getting them because they're putting a blockade up in front of themselves. So all of those things I think come into play if you want to get ahead in your career.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And yes, I was nodding along because I've had that conversation with other people and had kind of heard that stat myself. And it's just so interesting to me, like why it is that we think we have to fulfill 90% of a job's requirements to be capable of doing the job. Whereas men are like, yeah, I can do about 50% of that. I'll figure out the rest of it as I
Yeah.
get going. And I think that there's something about this idea of confidence, or like, I'll figure it out as I go, where a lot of times women are like, I don't want to be in a position that I don't already have the answer. Right? I don't wanna be in a position where I'm gonna look foolish because I don't know how to do something.
Right. And that all goes back to mindset and the narrative. The narrative is the belief. The narrative that's holding you back there is the belief that you're not ready because of these things. And really, the reality is you're holding yourself back from opportunities you're totally qualified for. And I remember reading a white paper years ago as well that talked about some of the differences between how men interview and how women interview. And I don't know if this is still relevant, but what they had shared, because it was a study on why there aren't more women in the C-suite. And I think we have to admit that there's systems in place that keep brilliant women out of the C-suite. It's not, we can't blame that all on the women because that's not accurate. But what they had looked at was that when men are interviewed, they will talk about the value they will bring, and women will talk more about the accomplishments they've had. And so it's almost like more values being put on the confidence and charisma, which we know is not necessarily an accurate picture of good leadership. Actually, a lot of what makes, the feminine traits like empathy and intuition are actually aligned with better leadership. But so when I do work with women in career coaching, I remind them to talk about the value you can bring, not just the accomplishments you've had, because I think that does exude a level of confidence in your capability to step into that role.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you for sharing that with us. So important that we're looking at what it is that we need to be doing to get to that next level that we want. And so, like you shared, what value do I bring for the future growth of whatever job I'm going to be stepping into for the company, or even if you're an entrepreneur or whatever, as opposed to, and it's not to say that your accomplishments aren't important. Of course they are,
Right.
but it's that looking back as opposed to looking forward. I
Yeah.
think that makes a little bit of the difference. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's gotta be a combination of both. I think you can touch on some of the value that you've brought, but I think you wanna almost think about your transferable skills in a way of, how can I take that into your organization, and what would that look like, and how can I make a difference here? So I think if you're not familiar with how to speak like that, those are good things to prepare and practice going into interviews so that you can bring that confidence and value to the table.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why it is so important for women to be supporting women. And what is it? Taylor Swift has said, like, there's a special place in hell for women that don't support women. I may be assigning it to the wrong, person, but that's where I thought I heard it from. So what do you think about this? Why is it so important?
I think it's critically important because, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think that we work in a system created by men for men. And don't get me wrong, that we have wonderful male allies out there. But yeah, and I don't think it's a problem women can solve alone. I think we need our male allies. But I think that, again, something I heard years ago that always stuck with me was that women are very competitive with each other, and oftentimes, and it's typically because we've been sort of trained to believe that there's one role at the top level that's for women. And rather than looking at it and going, well, we need to change that, let's expand it, it becomes almost, the Hunger Games for that one role. And so then you have women, really harming other women rather than let's all pull each other up so we can take up more space at the top. And so I think that when I coach female executives in the C-suite, we always talk about how are you creating pathways for the younger women underneath you, mentoring and supporting, and making sure that we're doing all the things that we can to create more space for women at the top tiers of organizations. And I don't think we get there if we're infighting. I think we need to be firing on all cylinders with helping one another out.
Yeah. Yeah, great point, Jennifer. Thank you for that. The point that you made about we need our male allies as well to help us change the way that we're thinking about leadership positions, C-suite level positions, what really everything, every part
Yeah.
society. It's not just in that, field of or area. But yeah, I totally agree. Like we've got to be making the path for the people who are coming behind us as easy as possible. Yes, it's been hard for us, and we've maybe had to fight through that jungle to
Yeah.
get to where we are, but that doesn't mean we need to make it hard for the people behind us.
Exactly.
Making it easier for them. It's really the idea of what is it? The rising tide lifts all boats.
Yep.
So when we are working together and we are raising the aspirations and we're making it easier for the girls and women coming behind us, we all win. And really,
Agreed.
this is like all of society wins. It's not just women winning.
Correct. I mean, I think we're not maximizing the talents that women bring to the table. And I think that's just a huge missed opportunity. And so I couldn't agree more. I think the more generosity that women, and again, it all goes back to our first question about mindset. If your narrative is it's me versus her, um, we're really making ourselves small. But if our narrative is the more I help other women, the more we all rise, we're going to have much better outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, in really all areas. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, obviously in your career, in the company's success and whatever, because you're getting all the voices, you're getting all the ideas, coming at it from all the angles. I've said this before, and I completely agree with myself on this, is that when you've got, all the different types of brains and you've got, everybody coming together to solve problems, you're going to get there so much faster.
Yes. I agree with you as well. You don't
Okay,
just agree
thank
with
you.
yourself. I agree with you as well. Yeah, it's bringing the best to bear. And I'm very passionate about helping women and reminding women in power to create that space and to make that effort to help lift up the women coming up behind them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about like why people stay at jobs too long or jobs that they hate. And now, we've talked a little bit about some of that, but in the economic climate and things that are going on, what are your thoughts on how we can begin to move forward, like, especially if somebody gets laid off, like, if we're
Yeah.
fearful of what's happening or what's coming, how do we prepare ourselves? Or for the person who has just gotten laid off, how do they begin to prepare to move into their next job, find their next job, whatever the case is?
Yeah. And, what I'll say is everyone's situation is going to be a little different, right? Because some people are in situations where their finances are like, I need a job tomorrow. And other people have the flexibility to go, I can take this year of discovery and find the perfect next thing. So I don't think there's a one size fits all plan because you have to sort of honor what your reality is. But a couple of things I think are really important. If we're just laid off, I do think understanding that there is a bit of a grieving process that has to happen and self-care is so very important in those first stages because it's hard to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps when you've gone through a tremendous loss. I mean, some people are losing jobs after 20 years. It's deeply tied to their identity. And so to take care and honor that experience within whatever time window you have allowed to you, and then I think it's taking stock of, do you want to do the same thing or do you want to do something different? Because as we were talking earlier, sometimes those painful moments are also huge opportunities. And so it's a good chance, it's a good opportunity to take stock and say, all right, I'm here. What am I great at? What do I love? What do they pay me for? I forget how to pronounce it. Is it like Aikijai? Is it, I'm totally completely messing that up. It's a Japanese sort of approach to looking at the intersection of those four things of, I'm going to mess it up now, but it's like sort of like, what am I great at? What do I love? What will I get paid for? And there's a fourth one. So taking stock of, again, your unique value, what kind of work you're interested in. A lot of people have transferable skills they don't realize. So taking stock of those things and doing that first and getting clear, because what a lot of people do, one mistake people make is they go straight to their networks. And I always say sometimes you have great contacts, but you get like one at bat. So don't waste it if you don't know what your ask is. You have to make it easy for people to help you. So I think, once you've gotten some clarity, then I think you can start making some action plans about your network and always start with them and what you want to do. And if you're in a job that you hate, again, it's the same thing, taking stock of what level of flexibility do I have? And if you're working 80 hours a week, you're going to have to carve out some time. And I hate to say it, but maybe let some things fall through the cracks so that you can make the time to make a plan to transition yourself into a better environment, because nobody should stay in a toxic environment. I can't tell you how strongly I feel about that. Those are some, I think, initial steps people can take.
Yeah, excellent suggestions, Jennifer. Thank you for that. And I think your point about taking time for a little bit of that grieving, because it's so true. We do tie our identity to what we do. So often it's who we are. I mean, it's not really who we are, but we think it's who we are. Yes.
Yeah.
And so taking time, if we've got it, to just, it doesn't have to be 6 months. You're taking time to think about, and get over losing the job. We often don't have time for that. But, taking some time to grieve that and then look at it possibly being the best thing that ever could have happened to you, which many times it is,
Yeah.
because you're released from that to find something better. And by taking stock of what, those Japanese saying, and we'll have to look it up to include in the show notes, because I love this idea of like, what do I enjoy doing? What am I good at? What can I get paid for? These are the questions you should be asking yourself to figure out what you want to do next. And then your point about not reaching out to your network too early, I think is great, because that is the first thing I think many people do is,
Yeah.
I got to talk to people I know and get another job like now. And we could be damaging our relationships if we do that, if we're asking too early, right?
Yeah, I think just, you want the best help you can get. And so the clearer you are, the easier it is just for someone to help you. I mean, if you think about how busy people are, and even people who have the best intentions and want to help you, if your ask is kind of muddy, people won't know how to action on it. And so if you can be somewhat clear of, hey, I'd love to be connected here, or do you know anyone in this space? I'm looking for something that hits these criteria. That's going to make it easier for people to help you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. If you don't know what you're asking for, they don't know how to help you.
Yeah.
It couldn't be easier to, understand that. And so great point. Thank you for that. Oh my gosh. Okay. So at this point, Jennifer, I think I'd like to have you share with the person listening, if there's anything that you haven't said to this point in our conversation that you really think they need to hear, what would it be?
Ooh, that's such a great question. I mean, I think we covered a lot of good ground. I think that I just feel very strongly, as someone who left a career behind that I enjoyed but wasn't the thing for me, that, we talked about it's not a straight line, it's never too late. I guess my message is, don't ever stay in situations that don't serve you or see your value, whether that's personally or professionally, because, and I've dealt with that both personally and professionally. And what's beyond that, if you're willing to kind of muster up the courage, which is hard, it's usually something just so much better for you. And so there's so many possibilities out there. I think people just need to remind themselves of that and, quiet the fear down a little bit and go after the things that really matter to them, because we got one time around with this rodeo and there's no repeats. So to really take advantage and make the most of our time here.
Yeah. Yeah. Great reminder. Thank you for that. So I always love to have my guests share if there's books or podcasts that they have found to be beneficial or influential or helpful. What would you like to share with us today?
So, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. I love all of her work around vulnerability. I've read Dare to Lead. I've read a number of her books, but I think anyone who struggles with shame or vulnerability, I think she really creates such safety in understanding that. I also love Adam Grant. I was just reading his book, Think Again, which I think is a critical read because we are now in a time of constant change. And leaders who are the most change agile and willing to think in new and different ways are the people who are going to be most valuable. So, learning how to expand your thinking is so important. And then I have a daughter who has ADHD. So, I have really been kind of forced to learn about it in order to support and advocate for her. And so, someone on LinkedIn had shared this book. I'm going to share it, The Canary Code. And it's a guide to neurodiversity, dignity, and intersectional belonging at work. And thinking about my daughter, I realized that we all have very different, beautiful, amazing brains, and we have to figure out the ways to maximize and leverage those brains. And some of that also ties into neurodivergent brains. So I'm trying to learn more about that so I can help a wider variety of people.
Mm, yeah, great recommendations for sure. I love Brene Brown. I've read a number of her books as well, and she's just fantastic. I mean, she has spent her entire career studying shame, right? And so much of what she talks about is how we can, heal ourselves around that. So I highly recommend her, all of her books.
Yeah.
And Adam Grant is new, so I'll for sure include all the details for the books that you've suggested. The Canary Code is a good one as well. And I think that I've had a number of guests on to talk about ADHD, especially ADHD in women going through menopause, undiagnosed through our youth. And when we hit menopause, it's just like, pew,
Yeah.
everything just goes off the charts. And you're just like suddenly going, oh, wow, if I had known this when I was a teenager or in my youth, my life could have been completely different, right?
Yeah.
But here we are. So I think that's a great read as well. So, include that in the notes. What
Right.
about any podcasts that you would like to suggest the listeners check out?
Yeah. So, still Brene Brown, love her. I like Mel Robbins. I think she brings a lot of interesting perspectives to the table. And then for people who are more in like the corporate space, HBR IdeaCast brings a lot of different ideas. You mentioned Taylor Swift before. We're Swifties in this house. And I know they did an article about, what we could learn about leadership from her because she's a pretty phenomenally successful human. So I think there's a lot of great, more broad content there for people who are in the corporate space.
Great suggestions. Again, thank you for that. So, Jennifer, would you share with the listeners how they can find you, follow along with the work that you're doing? If they have questions for you, how would they be able to do that?
Yeah. So my website is envisionleaders.com. So that's Envision leaders.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm under Jennifer Emmerich Sherman. And you can always email me at jen@envisionleaders.com if you have any questions or if I can be of help or support.
Yeah, excellent. And are you on any of the social sites besides LinkedIn that people can
I,
follow you?
I'm just dipping my toe. I'm Gen X. I'm a little late to the party in the tech world, but I'm starting to get on Instagram, but I'm figuring that out. So I would say start with where I've mentioned, and hopefully podcasts and things are on their way.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Well, thank you again, Jennifer. This has been a fantastic conversation. I so appreciate all this amazing information that you have shared with us. Great tips, suggestions, things that we can work on immediately, regardless of what position we're in. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for that and for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun, and it was great speaking with you.
Excellent. We'll talk more soon. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.